Okay. Oh, yeah. So when did the Shiva Nikiyim started? So we saw there's a machlokas between the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah that at a minimum you got to only start after 4 days. Even if she saw blood for just one spot, she can't start counting Nikiyim, Shiva Nikiyim till the 4th day. According to Ramah and Ashkenazim, you have to wait until the 5th day before she can start counting Zayin Nikiyim. So at a minimum, there's always a 12-day period. The minimum of 5 days for Ashkenazim, followed by 7 days of Yemei Libun. Okay, that could be more. I mean, a woman could bleed for 7 days, for 8 days, but it's usually not like that. So, and interesting, Rav Ovadia Yosef said that Sfardim can be makel to just. Remember, the issue of the 4 and 5 days all had to do with the possibility that they were having relations with the husband. The semen was the shechva zera was still being toilet from her. That could make her tameh. So the Ramah says, we make a low plum. Makes no difference whether they had relations, they didn't have relations. Because it might happen, we always wait 5 days. The Shulchan Aruch still bases it on if there was no relations, it potentially could be even less than 4 days. However, in contrast to Rav Yosef, Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, who was the chief rabbi, writes in the Darchei Tahar that in his opinion, Sfardim are machmir to follow the opinion of the Ramah, to wait 5 days. To really create a situation where it's the same din for all women. To prevent mistake in counting. The custom is to call Isha Shirasa Damel Kesem, she saw blood or even a stain, and a woman who gave birth. She cannot do her separate, the hefsektar where she checks. Remember, before Bein Hashmoshes is to make sure that she's clean. That's the hefsektar, that she stopped bleeding, and she cannot do that until right before the 5th day. Beinim shimsha, beinim lav. Right? He's machmir for this Sfardim because the Shulchan Aruch had it based on whether they had relations or not. He's saying we make it as a low plum. And he goes into specifics. Isha Sharasa Dam Motzei Shabbos. Let's say she saw blood Motzei Shabbos Saturday night. Beinim shimsha lifneichen, beinim lav, whether they had relations or not. Tafse hefsektar b'yom hachamishi. Thursday, late afternoon, she should do the hefsektar. V'rab Dalel Shishi. Right? So Thursday night, the night of Friday, Tatchil Lispor Shiva Nikiyim. The Hayom Shishi, Friday, Hayom Rishon L'Sfira Shiva Nikiyim. It's because we let 5 days go by. So the Thursday night of the next week, that's when she's going to go to the mikveh. Because if you count, it'll be Zayin Nikiyim. Vein L'Shanos V'Minag Zeh. And that's the minig both for Sfardim and Ashkenazim. An important summary psak. Ha'ara, the Ramon Sif Yud Alf Yud Gimel Vayin Shud Zivchet Tzadik, Uveni Shchai Shana Shnia Parsha Tzadik Bavi Eretz Chaim Sima Shekosov Shizbanenu Noagina Lachra Kiminek Shekosov M'Rabanan. These are all Sephardic poskim. So he's bringing proof to this thing that he said that in our day, even Sephardic women should follow the stringency of the Ramah. If you remember, the Ramah said, we always hold 5 days. It was the Sephardim that would advance it to the 4th day. So for the Mordechai Eliyahu in Paskin, Mordechai Eliyahu was chief rabbi 20 years ago. He said that even the Sephardic women, and we see all of these Sephardic poskim, the Ben Ish Chai, who lived in Baghdad in 1850, in that period of time, they also wrote to follow the Ramah for Sephardic populations. There are some exceptional cases where even Ashkenazim will follow the Ramah, are lenient to wait only 4 days. In addition, Ashkenazim are lenient to allow waiting 5 days from the time of relations rather than the time of menstruation, one specific case. And some of these cases are summarized in the excerpt below from Sefer Puah. Lefia noagim karam, according to those that follow the Ramah, us, in Pershu mikoach Israel chati yicholim lemanos l'tzorach zeh. Let's say they saw a kesem the woman saw a stain and they abstained from relations because of that. So those can be counted as well in for these kind of purposes when they're counting these 4 or 5 days. Also, yesh mikrim shegama machmirim kramo hekil lasos hafsek Torah achrei 4 yomim b'lvad lo 5. He says even those that are machmir like the Ramah, there are certain situations where you could do the hafsek Torah not on the 5th day but on the 4th day. To go the matzav sheyesh biutz mukdam. If they know the couple is trying to have a child, and the doctors have told her that she ovulates early, and therefore by going to the mikveh earlier, having relations earlier, it's a better chance to have children because that's going to time with the ovulation properly. If, for example, the night of her going to the mikveh is going to be Friday night after a yont, because the way yontif came out, the fact that she has to scrub herself, etc., before going to the mikveh, it's going to be a significant amount of time between when she goes to the mikveh. And and so on. And for example, let's say the husband's going to be out of town. And remember, the mikveh is going to be in a week from now, so they'd rather advance it one day. So you see, they're more lenient for tzorech in the calculations of for fertility reasons. They might, because all of this is chumras after chumras anyways. So in that situation, they might advance it by one day. Now, is it permitted for a woman who's a nida to douche or wipe herself internally in order to remove any residual semen and allow her to begin counting the Shiva Nakim earlier? So let's say according to the Shulchan Aruch, where it is difference whether they had relations or didn't have relations. And we're concerned that there's going to be Shechva Zera Poiletis, that Shechva Zera is going to drop out of her. Well, let's say she cleans herself very well immediately after relations. And therefore she wipes away the possibility that there's going to be Shechva Zera coming out from her. So could we advance the Hefsek Tahara even earlier? Let's say she stopped bleeding. She bled for one day. She had relations the day before, but she cleaned herself out. And she wants to do the Hefsek Tahara on day 2 or day 3. That's the shot. In that case, right, the answer is that this is subject to machlokas between the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam. According to Shulchan Aruch, it's permitted. Because remember, the Shulchan Aruch bases the whole thing about the fact, this issue about relation. Ramah got rid of that. Ramah made a low plume. While the Ramah holds that people nowadays are not familiar with the technique of cleaning oneself out to perform it effectively. In addition, the Ashkenazi custom has discovered to wait 5 days even when the couple did not engage in relations at all. Like we said before, we made a low plume. We said it makes no difference whether they had relations or not. We're not interested in that issue of the Shechva Zera being poletis or not. It's 5 days, period. Says the Shulchan Aruch, Ha'isha sheshim shemitasa, they had relations. And then on Shabbos, right? And then V'rosach, then she saw Motzi Shabbos. Upaska, then she stopped bleeding after one day. And the Rotzelis from Yom Machras Riyosa, and she wants to start counting on Monday already. Tikaneach Yofe Yofe, so she can clean herself really good. Also Moka B'moch, right? The private part with a sponge, or bebeged or a shmata, lafli kolazera, or tirchot b'mayim chami, or wash in hot water. And that will cause the zera to come. So the Shulchan Aruch allows it, and therefore the Shulchan Aruch would allow in certain situations. They have sektar to be much earlier. Says the Ramah Yeshoimrim, they ain't not bekim bisman hazeh. That, by the way, whenever if you're learning Shulchan Aruch, and so one of the if you look at the tour, you'll see the Darkei Moshe. So the Darkei Moshe, like just like sometimes we want to know when the Shulchan Aruch says something, who is his sources? We look at the tour, look at the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef will give you the Gemaras and Rishonim that he's relying on. He's very silent. He's cryptic, not cryptic, but he's short in the Shulchan Aruch. He doesn't give you all the background, but the background is there. So one of the important sources is the Darkei Moshe in the tour as well, which is the Rav Moshe Isserles, which is the background for the Ramos Psak. So sometimes if you want to see who the Yeshomim is, he'll bring you who the Yeshomim were that say, maybe the Radvaz, maybe the Maharil. He'll bring you a Rishon, right? the Ramah was in Krakow 1580, something like that. So he wants to bring you a Rishon, the Marami Rottenberg, which was 1200, 1250. They're always trying to rely on earlier sources. So Yesh Omrim, so he has somebody that he's relying on, and he brings this that says that we don't rely on people cleaning themselves properly. And that has to be the minute. The Ramah reminds us we're not counting the Zayin Akim until day 5. Period, is a low plug.
I'm sorry, but what does it mean in
We're not expert at it. So it must be that this was some kind of expertise of how to clean yourself well, with etc. was handed down, how to do it, etc., etc. We're not baki. It's like a halachic cleansing. You're wondering, well, what do you mean? Why? If we can clean, we can clean just as good as they. Maybe not.
That's not what it's referring to.
It's referring to sort of a making sure that halachically it was cleaned out properly. So we are knowing, so it'll all be uniform. Parts get it before Melu. Whoever breaks a fence in these areas, right? A snake should bite him. It means they're very machmir on all of these.
The one that's poskin, like, is that what he's selling? Someone that's
No,
poskin, or the individual?
No, if someone breaks this minhag and doesn't follow what he says, poiretz getter, the word in Hebrew means break down a fence. This is a fence that has been set up, and he doesn't want you to break it down. Whoever breaks it down, whoever goes against this minhag, because remember, it's not me'ikra, Jerry, it's not me'ikra din. These are gzeros. But the Ramah is telling you this is something that is customary in our population and shouldn't be broken. The Torah Tahara holds that Sfardi may be lenient about this issue in accordance with the opinion of Shulchan Aruch. Torah Tahara was one of the Yosefs. Isha Shashim Shim Baila, right? They had relations, and according to Sfardi, they do follow that. Bachakak Rasa Damu Paskam, and she saw blood for a day and then stopped. Leminig Sfardi ve'edos hamizrach, right? To the Sfardim and to those people from Iraq and right and the Edot HaMizrach, if they want to make a hefsek tara, she can do it. Now how? She had relations. Why aren't we worried about the semen coming out? Because Bernie, remember the Shulchan Aruch said we rely on cleaning out. And the Ramah is citing Rishonim that, hey, we don't rely on it. It's machlokes hapoiskim. She should do both. She should bathe in warm water and clean herself out well. That will cause the zer to come out. So you now know that there's a major machlokes in halacha between Sfardim and Ashkenazim. It's a major point of dispute. Ashkenazim noagim la'achmir shol lismach hazeh lamdin chamisha yomim b'chol inyan. It's valuable to know. Okay, we're gonna start Hilchos Hachakos today. I would recommend on page 125 the further iyun, which deals with very complicated cases of infertility, where you'll see the poskim are lenient in cases where a woman is spotting, or in these cases we talked about ovulation. You want to see a little bit more detail of that? You may do so. Okay, page 173. So one of the reasons given for the laws of Nida is that these laws engender the regular renewal of feelings of love and intimacy between husband and wife. The concept is suggested by the Gemara in Nida. On Lamed Aleph on the base. Why did they say that their husband and wife are prohibited in relations for 7 days? He's going to get bored. The excitement is going to go away. So there's a separation every month where on renewal, it's like going into the chuppah again. More says it beferish. So there's introduction of periodic distancing between a husband and wife because it fosters heightened closeness between them when that distance is removed. So besides the prohibition of having relations, there are many dinim applying to husband and wife regarding that they have to separate from each other in other ways. The halacha requires the husband and wife to maintain harchakot, acts of distancing, by refraining from three-tiered categories of affectionate and intimate acts while she's a nida. The first two of which apply to men and women who are not married as well. Number one, intimate relations. This is forbidden on a Torah level and is subject to the punishment of chores. Two, affectionate contact, hugging and kissing. These are also forbidden by the Torah, according to many Rishonim, such as the Rambam, while others, such as the Ramban, hold that they are forbidden only midrabanan. And we will discuss this machlokas later.
We could see why it's geared to intimate relations. I mean, to wait a week, and then have relationship after.
Go ahead.
Otherwise, the woman would not be able to give food to somebody else, to a visitor. It's only to her husband. Is that correct? If she's a nida, she cannot hand anything for her. But for somebody else, she could.
So therefore, when it helps with lachnosas orchid, what do you say?
What I'm saying is that's the reason why.
It allows her to do gemilas chesed to other people?
In other words, she's allowed to give food to another person, correct?
Yes.
So therefore, the reason why she's not allowed for a husband,
Yes,
is
to foster gemilas chesed.
Exactly.
You want to say? Okay.
Otherwise, why?
Well, because
Why
it
shouldn't
seems
a
from
woman
the
allowed to give somebody else?
No. But it seems from the Gemara that the restriction against having intimate contact with your wife, including hugging and kissing, is to foster that separation from themselves,
Right.
which then when they come together again will be a heightened
Right, but
intimacy.
to another person, she could give. She invites people over. She could hand food over,
Yeah.
which she can't do to her husband.
Yeah, now we'll see.
And
Remember,
that's the reason. That's the
now-
only reason.
now-
Why else?
Now remember, in the times of Chazal, so when a woman was tameh, so it's not so pashut that she could hand food, she would be metame the food. And if there were people who were noyeg eating their food b'tahara, so she would not be distributing food. Not just that, she wouldn't be baking, she wouldn't be kneading dough,
Right.
because she's tameh.
That's
So-
why people had a couple of wives.
So in other words, she would be able to. Some people do it.
Yeah, no. So there were proofs. When we say chaverim kol Yisrael, a chaver was somebody who ate his food b'tahara, even though he wasn't a kohen. But this was a level of precious. It was a level of separation. So just in case they'd be invited over to somebody's house that they're eating korbanos or something like that, they were very careful in not eating foods that were tummy. Now we're not knowing, like we don't have tummy b'tahara anymore. We're all tummy mace. Yes.
Yeah, I don't understand also the Gemara, because the Gemara says that should be separated from the wife for 7 days, so that basically that Ahava comes back. It's like the first night of marriage. Guy has 4 wives. He's not with every wife in the same time. You're talking about the Bismanas at that time. They had a few wives.
But when we go through Shas, when we go through Chazal, it seems like the instances of people having multiple wives was extremely rare. You needed to be very wealthy to have multiple wives. We know that. And we see, right, there are many statements where it was not common for them to have multiple wives. 1,000 years. There are 1,000.
Ellie's grandfather.
Right. One of our Dafyomi people, Eli Marciano, so his
In Morocco.
father had 2 wives, and later on that they took care of each other.
Not his father, his
The grandfather.
grandfather.
And when the grandfather died, the 2 women took care of each other. Like
Yes.
the wives were very
The
close.
grandfather lived a very.
One was a cook and the other one was fun.
That's a close generation.
Okay, so Machlokas Rambam and Ramban, whether or not hugging and kissing is Asr midaraisa or midrabanan. And what's the third one? Other forms of contact. These demonstrate closeness less directly, like eating from the same plate, handling items from one to the other, and they are forbidden on a rabbinic level. So in the next 2 shiurim, we're going to explore these harchakot. Okay, page 174. In earlier chapters, we've already seen that there are 2 parts to the period of ritual impurity. The days during which he is bleeding referred to as Yemei Nida. So that's the 3 days, the 4 days that she was actually bleeding, right? We're not, we have to, then she gets to the Yemei Libun, which is the Zayin Nikiyim after they have Siktahar, right? The Shiva Nikiyim are referred to as Yemei Libun. The word Libun comes from the word white, right? Because she's constantly checking herself with a white cloth, right? During which she established that she's no longer bleeding. Hi, Harold. Thank you so much. Do you have your volume? You can share with Jerry.
I forgot my note. I know that part.
Sure.
Although one might suspect that there's greater stringency when a woman is actively menstruating. Chazal clarified in the Gemara Shabbos that the rules of Nida, including Hachakot, equally apply to both periods of time. So that's very important. We're going to see that these dinim apply not just to those days where she bled, but even during the Zayin Nikiyah. Kedetanya. Masechta Shabbos Samech Dal Amud Beis. V'hadava b'nidasa. The Zakenim Arishonim Omri shelo tikcho. She shouldn't put on makeup. V'lo tifkos. She couldn't put rouge on her face. Tikchol is like eye makeup, and tifkos is like rouge on her cheeks. V'lo tiskashek b'vigdei sivonim. Shouldn't wear colored clothing. Those things make her more attractive to her husband. We don't want her to be attractive during those periods of time. You're going to make her disgusting in the eyes of her husband. That means she remains prohibited until she goes to the mikveh. Now, she doesn't go to the mikveh until after the Zayin Nikiyah. So the Gemara is going to learn from here that she's treated as a nida in the same way, both in the days of bleeding and in the days of libur. The Gemara earlier in Masechta Shabbos tells a story that refers to a Torah student who felt that halachic differences existed between these two periods, but he was mistaken and punished for it. This is the Masechta Shabbos Yud Gimel Tanud Ve'Eliyahu. Ma'aseh b'Tamid Echad, a story with a student. Shoshana Harbe v'Kora Harbe. This was a big Talmid Chacham. He knew how to learn. He had learned a lot. Not only that, he had done an internship. Shimesh Talmidei Chachamim Harbe. They worked with Talmidei Chachamim. Chazal tell us there's no one great. Why did Yoshua merit to become the leader of the Jewish? Because he did shimush to Moshe Rabbeinu. When you're mishamesh, you have residency and internship directly under. By the way, Yaakov will tell us. He probably saw it himself. I've heard from Rabbi Riskin that on a regular basis, Rav Moshe Feinstein in his apartment, on days where he would give psak, people, he had a day where he was open, he'd always have 5 Rabbonim, guests, like from Rabbi Riskin himself told, I heard the story, they would sit behind and people would come in with all sorts of shilas, and people would do this for 6 months to a year. Every Thursday night or whatever night it was, they would come, they'd be zocha to sit behind him. For example, during residency, Havdil, Shlomo Raz, one of my surgeons, he did a very complicated operation. Behind us were always 10 surgeons from China, from Egypt, from Russia, watching,
It was in the operating room.
and people walking from the, yeah, exactly. So, but that's Shimush Talmidei Chachamim. So this Talmid did all of it. But Umeis b'chatziyah, he died at a very young age. V'haisi isha notelas tefillah, u'b'chzartem v'tiknesit v'timidrashos. So the wife took his tefillin, went to all the shuls and to the Batei Medrash. V'amar lehem, ksiv b'Torah ki hu chayecha v'arach yamecha. I mean, Torah is supposed to provide long life. She was bitter, and she was saying, "What kind of reward did my husband get?" Baili Shoshana Harbe, V'Kora Harbe, V'Shimish Tamei Chachamim Harbe, V'Nei Mames b'Chatziyah. Why did he die at 35? If he was so devoted to Torah, and it says Ki Hichayach V'Arach Yamecha, V'Lohaya L'Machzir Adova. Nobody had an answer for him. Pamachas Yisarachti Etzlo. Now the Tana Devei Eliyahu. So we say Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel, the yeshiva of Rabbi Shmuel. So the Tana Devei Eliyahu is Eliyahu Novi. He also had a base medrash, and Pamachas Nisarachti Etzla, Yonavi reports that he was a guest by her. Vais Mesicha Kolos Mo'om. And she also told over this whole story. Ve'omarti lo, and I said to her, Biti, my daughter, B'meini dusecha mahu etzlecha. How were you and your husband when you were in your time of need? Amrli chas v'shalom afilu be'etzba ketana lo nogu bi. Even with his little pinky, he never touched me during the Yemei Nida. Now remember, the Yemei Nida are the days when she's bleeding actively. Okay. What about B'mei libu nechma etzlecha? Now we discussed that once she stops bleeding and then she does a hefsek tahara and she finds herself clean, she has to have zayin nikiyim. That's called the Yemei Libun. So Yonavi asked her, what were your relations during the Yemei Libun? So she responded, Ochali mi, he ate with me, v'shosim, he drank with me, the Yoshin imi b'kir of basar, he slept next to me in bed, but we never had relations, but we were close. The Omarti lo Baruch HaMakom Shahargo. Blessed is Hashem that he killed him. Shelo nosa panim l'Torah, because there was no respect for Torah given. Shari Amar Torah ve'lisha b'nidas tu masol lo tikra. During the period of Nuda, you should not come close. So here's a big Talmud Chacham who did not distinguish, who distinguished between the Yemei Nida and the Yemei Libun, and you're not supposed to. Based on these two Gemaras, the poskim are going to learn that there's no difference in these dinei harchaka between the Yemei Nida and the Yemei Libun, right? The Torah student.
How did this guy not know? He's a Talmud Chacham, right? How did he not know that in both that you're supposed to separate in both time periods?
It's one and the right one.
Well, I mean, if he's Talmud Chacham, I mean, what does that mean? I don't understand.
No.
I can tell you, hey, there's a check and mezuzah or something. But
Now remember, but these in Yonim, we have a real strong Yetzer Hara for these things. So and in Talmud Chachamim, sometimes they say that the bigger the Talmud Chacham, the bigger is your Yetzer Hara. So people were nichshal in these areas. They failed in these areas. By the way, Walter, the issue of hugging and kissing, we'll see, is a machlokas Rambam and the Ramban, whether it's a deraisa or derabban. Ramban holds it's a derabban. But a rabbanon you can't violate either.
Not saying it's not a violate, but just giving a thing. There's a gather. Some people can make them basically a derabban and a deraisa. Where what the hate is. In other words, there's a good hate for the Rabban.
Right, but okay.
And the halacha is strong.
Correct.
I'm not saying that the halacha is not strong. I'm just saying that the hate, the courage, or whatever's going to take place in Yemei Libun is different.
We didn't say, there's no car race if they didn't have relations.
In other words, yes, and that's what I'm saying. But this guy got courage. This guy got cut off. He got killed.
But maybe it was done because he was a Talmud Chacham, and there was a lesson that had to be taught. Higher standard.
I understand it's a higher standard, but
he didn't deserve Koris Maker, but Walter, he didn't deserve Koris Maker Rav did, because they didn't physically have relations.
That's when he had courage.
Correct. So
can I just ask you, from the beginning of the Gemara, it says it includes a lot of big dates Savonit, but didn't we learn that during the Yemei, this Nikiyim, that when a woman just checks herself, it's advantageous for a woman to wear colored garments.
Yeah, but we're talking about outer.
We're
talking about, but those are her undergarments. Big date Sivoni means outer garments.
You mean out for attraction?
Yeah, for attraction. Exactly. We have Gemaras where even they would just, if a woman would hang her colored clothing out on a line, it created Yetzer Hara for people. Even viewing women's clothing that were colored and finery and all that led to
arousal.
Yeah, exactly. So it seems that the Torah student believed that some of the harchakot described above are permitted during the Yemei Libun or Shiva Nikiyim. However, he was condemned for his lax behavior by Eliyahu, indicating that there should be no distinction between these two periods. And this is the approach taken by Tosfos, who explains that Eliyahu inquired about both periods of time simply because they already understood how the man had erred, but not because any halachic difference exists between them. Eliyahu understood what happened to this guy, but he didn't ask, oh, how did you need to, because there's a difference between how you spoke. No, Eliyahu understood that they're supposed to be treated the same. That's how Tosfos learns. However, Tosfos cites Rashi, Rabbeinu Hananel, Rabbeinu Hananel is also very early Rishon. You'll sometimes find the Rabbeinu Hananel on the side of Gemaras, different Girsos and things like that, right? Who apparently understand that a halachic distinction between the periods may still exist. So there's machlokas Rishonim how to learn this Torah Devei Eliyahu. Says Tosfos, B'meili Bunayu Ma'atzlacha. So when he inquired of the woman, what did you do during the Yimei Libun? Lo mishum sheyesh l'chalik benidos l'libun. So Tosfos is warning us to say, don't think that Eliyahu is asking that question because he thinks there's a halachic difference between the two periods. No. She remains in the same status until she actually goes to mikvah, which is after the Zayin Nekiyim. That's from Rabbi Akiva. Ella, Eliyahu Novi knew that this was going on. Rabbi Hananel the Rashi Pirshu, the Perak Afal Pi and Ksubis, Gabi Shmuel, Mechalfaleit Visu B'Yadu D'Smola. That is, instead of during this period of time, the wife of Shmuel, instead of pouring with her right hand, she poured with her left hand. Hainu Melibuna and Einir Kitibirashti. And Tosfos disagrees with Rashi, that Rashi seems to be learning because he's quoting a Gemara by Shmuel that there might have been a different way of being noyeg. I want to read this footnote about, although Eliyahu clearly understood the basis for the divine punishment meted out to this man, this of course does not mean that we can always understand the reason why some people die young. In addition, one who violates the harchakot discussed here also is not necessarily liable for such punishment. That's what Walter and I were discussing. Perhaps Eliyahu ascertained that this Torah student was on a particular high spiritual level. Rather, the point of the story seems to be simply to demonstrate how serious the prohibition of harchakos is even during the Yimei Libun. So, how does the Shulchan Aruch Paskin, as clarified by the Shach, rules in favor of Tosfos, which is the majority opinion among the Rishonim, that all laws of harchakas apply equally during the days of when is bleeding, as well as the Shiva Nekiyim.
I always thought also was the same. I thought about
Chayav Adam lifrosh miishto b'mei tumasa, ad shetispor v'tidbol. You have to separate, and then until she counts the Zion and goes to mikvah. Says the Ramah, afilu shosas man arach v'loy tovla. And even if she waits, even let's say for whatever reason she couldn't go to the mikvah, right? Tamid ibn Yudos Tidbol. All those harchakos remain until she goes to the mikvah. Says the Shach, Tamid ibn Yudosa, Kloimar, Af b'mei libuna kol din nida yeshma. Very clear. During the Yimei Libun, she has the same dinim. Kedis v'poiskim umevim Beis Yosef. That's how Beis Yosef brings all of those. The Shulchan Aruch later, in the same simon, repeats and specifies even more clearly that all harchakot apply equally throughout the Nida period. The Ramah, though, notes that according to some Rishonim, such as the Rav Yah, the rules of eating from the same plate, which are in that third level of harchakot described above, right? We said relations is 1, 2 is kissing and hugging, 3 is things like passing things back and forth from each other or eating from the same plate. So the Rav Yah is more lenient. He also observes that the custom in his locale was to be lenient about this, though he concludes that one should preferably be stringent. Says the Shulchan Aruch, during the whole period of counting. And of course, whether she really saw with her gasha, or whether it all got triggered with a kesem, right? Remember, kesem is the rabbanon, but you still have to wait. Do I have to turn on day 5 according to Ramah, and then design the key? Says the Ramah, so if you look at the Darchei Moshe, you'll see that he's referring to the Rav Yah, that there was a Rishon that said that during Yimei Libun, you could eat from each other's plate. However, yesh lahachmer, says the Ramah. The Taz agrees with the Ramah's recommendation for stringency and writes even more sharply, based upon the Bach, right? The Bach was the commentary on the Torah, that the lenient opinion, the Taz, by the way, was the son-in-law for Bach, right? That the lenient opinion has no basis. On the contrary, as the Taz, one should behave with even more stringency during the Shiva Nekiyim. V'chein noagim lahakel, because of Mori Chami, right? His father-in-law, he's referring to the Bach. Ein lahem al mishi yismachu. These mekilim don't have anybody to rely on. V'roy lidrosh berabim sha'aser. And one should publicly darshan that it's prohibited. Venerally od, He says you should be more stringent during the Zayin Nikiyim. He'll come to rely, this will be a habit. And because, quote, she's less tamei. So in the end, the psak is to be machmir regarding the harchakos, even the third level of harchakos. Now, forget about hugging and kissing, non-intimate physical contact and passing objects. So we saw previously in the Gemara Shabbos that even minor physical contact with one's wife, such as touching her with one's little finger, is forbidden while she's a nida. And this issue is elaborated upon by the Tanit Ve'Eliyahu, which cites the same story of the Torah student that died, but in greater detail. He studied a lot. He died half of his years. The woman, his wife, became a shiganer. And she went knocking at all of her husband's friends. What happened to my husband? And says the Torah Ve'Eliyahu, he was in the market. I went into her courtyard. She came and sat next to me. She was crying. Who makes me Chatziyama, and he died half of his years. How were you together during this Zayin Nikiyah? Did you bring him the knife to cut his meat? The nagobo bech afilu betzbaktana, and therefore maybe he touched you with a little finger. What do you mean? I washed his feet. I rubbed oil on his back. We slept in the same bed. However, we were each in our pajamas. Did we do anything else? So from the fact that Eliyahu asked the woman whether her husband had touched her even with his little finger, it's evident that even such minor contact is still forbidden. And the Shulchan Aruch rules clearly that all physical contact is forbidden. It says Shulchan Aruch Yordeh Kuf Tzadikei Lo Yigaba Filo Be'ez B'Katan. Pischei Tshuva Sayin Tashbat, who adds that the ban on touching applies not only to direct skin contact, but also to touching the clothing that the spouse is wearing. Kosovot, the Liga B'Vigdeh Ba'oide Levusha Yesh Lisrachik, about Kishein Aleh Mut. That means if she's not wearing the clothing, he can touch her clothing. That's the pshat. It's not that you're also to touch her clothing. Now, what is the halach regarding indirect physical contact? Is it permitted for a husband to pass items to his wife? Honey, pass the salt, right? Toys was citing Rashi as deriving from the El Rabbah that a man may not even pass an item to his wife when she's in a state of need. Since Eliyahu asked the woman whether she gave him oil or a jug, this indicates that passing objects is forbidden. Says Toysus and Shabbos, Rashi hayanoik isser lohoishig pesach miyado liyadav imeni dusa. That to pass a key from his hand or to her hand would be prohibited. Venir Leri, that's one of the Bali Toysfis. Sheyesh smach b'seir Eliyahu. The source of that is from this Seder Eliyahu. Omer law, Shema heveta lo Hashem. Did you bring him a jug of oil? Shema heveta lo et hapach. Did you bring another kind of pot? Miuasa Messiah, the naga beich be'ez baktana, or did you touch with a small finger? So Tosfos demonstrates some reservation about Rashi's stringent conclusion, because it's possible that Eliyahu's only objection to passing items was if the husband and wife thereby touched one another directly, meaning since it ended up with that finger thing, maybe the problem is by handing it, he's going to come to touch her. But it's not that passing the item is by itself a problem. Passing the item is a problem only because it might come to touch. That's the issue. The Magid Mishnah, who is a major commentary from the 1300s on the Rambam, right? Because the Rambam was Mishnah Torah. So the Magid Mishnah is one of the commentaries. Also takes a more lenient stance in extrapolating from the Rambam that passing is forbidden only when a wife is pouring a drink for her husband.
For her. For him, I mean, when she pours the drink, she's allowed to pour the drink or not?
No.
No,
No.
then
What's
it's for,
that do with, that's not to do with touching.
So
We're
it's-
afraid that she might
Admit-
touch it.
so
or-
what we see, the Rishonim are having a dispute whether or not the passing the items are on their own forbidden, or it's forbidden because it's going to be lead to touch. There's a big nafkamina. If you hold it, you can't pass. You can't pass. It doesn't do with touch. So we're going to see that he might be stringent about drinking because drinking is going to lead to licentious behavior. Okay. So the Rambam says, the kind of things that a woman does for her husband, so the mezika sakois was a certain kind of pouring of wine because they had to dilute the wine. The wine was very strong, so there was a dilution thing, and the wife apparently did that for the husband. And it was apparently it was like an intimate thing. And hatsasa mita, sort of making the bed, or washing his face and his feet. These are specially intimate things. Gzer mishum hirhu. This will lead to arousal. Shemayavolivo. Lefichach matzas mitasuk shinida shelo b'fanav. So therefore, she should make the bed when he's not there. Umozegas akos ve'ena nosenes oso biyodo kedarko. She can dilute the wine. She can prepare the cup, but may not give it into his hand. Ela manachos oso la'aretz. She puts it on the ground. Or ala kli or ala shulchan v'hunot. Puts it on the table and he takes it himself. Says the Magid Mishnah, V'da shemimasha kosav rabbeinu ve'ena nosenes oso biyodo kedarko tamid, that the wife has to change from the normal behavior, not put it directly into his hand. Nira, sheshara dvarim yichoylu la'asher b'yado liyado. Jerry, the Magid Mishnah is learning leniently to say that since the Rambam was medayik only mezika sakos, but therefore if you're going to pass the salt or something else, that would be permitted. That's how the Magid Mishnah is learning. V'chein das tzas meforshim v'yesh machmir b'chol dom. But some are machmir. How does the Shulchan Aruch? So you see, we have the Bali Toisfis, you have the Rambam, the Magid Mishnah's explanation. So eventually, how did the Shulchan Aruch paskin? The Shulchan Aruch codifies the halacha in accordance with the stringent opinion of Rashi that a man may not pass anything to his wife or vice versa when she's in nida, which the Shach adds applies even to a very long item. Meaning, you might think, let's say a broom, right, where they're very far away from each other when she's passing the broom. So maybe on those kind of items it would be permitted. It's like a low plug. They may not pass anything to each other. Even though if you're 10 feet away, when she hands it to you, you think that it might be more lenient. Rashi is machmir.
You would think that verbal communication would also be lead to.
So you want to say maybe there should be no communication.
I'm saying it's like the way that people talk with each other could also lead to the same thing. So,
Where do you draw the line?
what do you exactly?
Okay, so maybe we'll make, so Rav Karo explains, states the reason for this practice, so that the two do not come to touch each other. And apparently, talking to each other, they're not as concerned about that. V'lo yashit miyado liyada shum davar, v'lo yikablu miyado. She shouldn't give to him, and he shouldn't give to her. She shouldn't give to him. Shamayiga b'sara. It says the shach v'lo yashit miyado afilu b'davar shu arach, even along. Complication concerning this halacha often arises with respect to passing a baby between a husband and wife when she's in nida. According to the halachas recorded by the Shulchan Aruch, it would seem that passing a baby should be forbidden, just like passing any other object, despite the difficulty involved in putting a baby down. I mean, think about it. If the din applied to a baby, so you'd have to put the baby down on the table and pick it up, and then you couldn't hand it back and forth. So Rav Shimon ben Tzemach Duran, known as the Rashbats, permits the couple to pass the baby on the basis of the principle of Chai Noises Atzmo. So, for example, carrying a child on Shabbos, so you're not over, because a child will lighten itself. In a sense, a living thing carries itself. So it's not like dead weight. So says the Tashbats, Aval Rashi Zalei Anizer Afilu Loishid Lamafteach. It wasn't just a cup of wine. Rashi answered even a key. Cheinogu. But the litol miyadah hatinok, but the husband to take from the wife's hands the child near shemuter, the chai noises atzmo. The Rashbats explains his position more fully in a later tshuva in Hilchos Shabbos. One who carries a living being is not liable for hotzah, by carrying from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah or Daladamas Rosh Hashanah, because the living being carries itself. So two here explains Rashbats. The baby moves itself from the mother to the father, vice versa, which is not considered an act of passing. It's as if the baby is going, and it's not like the man or the woman is actually passing it, right? That we don't pass items. But there is a leniency to take a child. Because of the principle that a living being makes himself light or moves himself. It means she should be relatively passive. So obviously it has to do with a certain age. There's some age infants that they're not going to physically move from her arm to him. But if so, that would be certainly permitted according to Tashbats.
Can't be a crotch, you can't pass the baby. You never see a woman holding the baby.
Yes, you do. The woman passes it to her husband. The woman passes it to her husband. But technically, you wouldn't be able to do that if she was in need. She wouldn't be able to pass it to her husband because there the child is not.
She is in need.
We're not
No,
talking
no,
about you're talking
But
about
a
an uncle
kvater
and an aunt.
is usually a kvater is a friend. Usually it's not the mother.
Or a family member.
What if her name is
Oh,
Anita?
it's only a friend, I mean,
The kvater is usually not.
When a handful baby, the first person.
Yeah, that's not the mother. The mother oftentimes starts the chain, but the kvater is the last in the chain
No, I know.
and doesn't pass it to her husband. The woman passes it to, let's say, her mother or her aunt and the sisters and go like that. This question remains subject to debate among contemporary poskim. The Pischei Tshuva cites the opinion of Tashbats, and Rav Avodah considers this kula legitimate one to rely upon practically. Though he adds that one who is strict is praiseworthy. Yesh oimrim shemuter litol atinik miyadol shel ishto nida mishum shachai nose safno vehi ein osa klum. She doesn't do anything. El atinik yotzei me'atzmo v'chei kimo v'chei kavi. Yesh chokim v'machmer tavel obrach.
But I would think that the most practical explanation could be a little baby put down on a table will squirm and may slip off. You don't want chas v'shalom a living child to fall or be hurt, right?
I
mean,
know, but the Tashbats,
I know that's not what
it's not the reason that they give. It's not the reason that they give. Now, Rav Vosner, the Shevet HaLevi, just passed away a few years ago. Remember, the Shevet HaLevi lived in Bnei Brak. He was primarily the posek for the Hasidic communities. So here he's machmer shul likach tinach miyad liyad. Afilu gadol hayotzim me'atzmo v'nimshach. Even an older infant that would actively go from the arm of the mother to the father, he would still prohibit it. Rav Mordechai Eliyahu accepts the leniency of the Rashbats, but notes that it is limited to babies that are old enough to move their bodies somewhat from one parent to the other. So you see, he makes that distinction. So an infant, a 2-week infant or 3-week infant, you wouldn't be able to do that. This is all based on a child that can move. The child can move physically. If it's sick or really young, he's moved like an object, so that's also. Rav Mordechai Willig suggested an entirely different approach to being lenient in passing a baby. In his opinion, it is permitted because the baby is considered like a chola, one who is ill. A couple may be lenient to pass a baby to one another during nida, as the baby is considered a chola whose needs justify such leniency. This is particularly indicated in light of the reality that couples that take a stringent stand on this matter may actually endanger the baby by placing it on the floor on top of a car in ways that are unsafe. So here's Bernie. Here's Bernie. Here's Bernie. He's machavin to the
wife
dog.
is sick, he could give her anything he wants.
No, we talk about the baby.
I know.
They view the
But
baby as
I know the baby, but the wife.
Oh,
You're allowed
she's
to give
sick
her
in
the water,
bed,
you're allowed
yeah,
to give everything
give
to
her
her.
medicine.
A chola sheyesh bo sakana you can violate any law for a chola sheyesh bo sakana. A chola she'ein bo sakana may not be so poshut. I don't know. That's a good question. We'll see. It may cover some of those things. Here, Rabbi Willig is saying the baby is viewed as a the baby is viewed as a somewhat similar approach is taken by the work Nishmat Habayit. This is a sefer written by Yoatzot Halacha from Midrashet Nishmat. It was overseen by halachic advisors Rav Yehuda Herzl Henkin and Rav Yaakov Arhaftig, and edited by Rav Yehuda and Rabbanit Chana Henkin. Now remember, Rabbi Henkin was the Posek Hador before Rav Moshe. He passed away in 1958. And Rav Moshe basically took over. This is I think it's a grandson. I think it's the grandson.
Who was just killed. Yeah, I'm sorry. You were
Right. And Rav Moshe sort of stepped into the shoes of is the American Posek when Rav Henkin passed away. The Ezra's Torah Luach was established by Rav Henkin.
They were actually contemporaries for a while. I remember on the Lower East Side too. You had a shul on East Broadway.
Okay, so in that, like just reading the footnote again, it contains questions received on Nishmat's hotline and website. It includes a short answer and more in-depth halachic explanation. The second part of the book contains medical appendices explaining the medical background to the responses, and it contains haskamot from poskim. Right. Okay. So that in cases of need or emotional stress, one might rely on the lenient options to pass the baby directly, especially given the chance that one may not have a sturdy surface on which to place the baby. Okay, I'm going to stop a little earlier today because we're going to daven Mariv. And Chaim, we're going to give you a few minutes to come over.
On my way.
I'm surprised.